1 multimedia discussion post for MPA540. So here's a quick overview of what I will be discussing in this presentation. I'll first start with part 1 with a self-introduction, just so that you guys can get to know a little bit more about myself. And then I'll go into part 2, where I will discuss the tides of reform philosophies. And then I will close out with final remarks. So let's go ahead and get into it. So just a little bit about myself. I currently work for Riverside County and within the Department of Housing and Workforce Solutions. And there are 5 divisions, and I am under the Office of Homeless Services, formerly known as the Continuum of Care. So I am a program specialist, and I primarily manage the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. So I work directly with youth who are part of our Youth Action Board. And then on the top in the middle, you'll see myself and my 2 little brothers. I'm one of 3. And on the bottom of that picture, you'll see a graduation photo. I finished my undergrad in public policy, and I studied at UCR and graduated in 2023. A hobby of mine is drawing and reading, so I thought it'd be fitting to do a little sketch of some books. And then I also love traveling. My most recent travel was when I went to the Philippines with my family, so this is a picture of us in Boracay. If you haven't gone to the Philippines, I highly recommend you go. It is an amazing country. I'm full Filipino, and it's just a great place to visit. So enough about myself. Now I will go into part 2 of this presentation. So first I'll go into the first tide of reform by Paul Light, and that is scientific management. So this tide focused on efficiency through structure, and it really emphasized job specialization, a clear hierarchy with standardized processes. So the idea is that government functions best when those roles are clearly defined, and in HR, this shows up through formal job classifications, uniform hiring practices, and strict chains of command. So an example of this is within any government agency. I feel like there's always detailed job descriptions and job series, or a clear, at least for my department, there's clear program specialist 1, 2, and 3, and then you grow it within that role. So here you'll also see a general hierarchy. So that within Riverside County, there are multiple departments. The department I work for, as I mentioned, was the Housing Workforce Solutions, and then there's several divisions. There's 5 total, but 2 of them are the Workforce Development Division, and then the Office of Homeless Services, or Continuum of Care. And then, of course, for uniformity across all of these divisions, there are those specific but well-defined job classifications. Then moving on, we have the second tide, which is the war on waste. And this aims to eliminate inefficiency, fraud, and then any unnecessary spending. So it really brings a strong focus on rules, compliance, and then cost control. So in the public sector, in HR within the public sector, this can look like stricter audits, more layers of approval, and then just overall monitoring of employee activities, so timekeeping and use of resources. So an example of this is within my department, we have a fiscal team that processes all the claims that we receive. So my division primarily manages funding that's reimbursed to subrecipients, and our fiscal team is in charge of reviewing all the invoices and receipts that are submitted for reimbursement. And they just make sure that the agencies are submitting for eligible and reasonable costs. And so if they find that an agency is not within the parameters of whatever funding source they're submitting for, then our fiscal team can deny that claim. And ultimately, if we find that the agency isn't able to effectively spend down the funding, within the eligible, reasonable guidelines, then that funding is reallocated to another agency that can. And so this is a way that we prevent waste and, inefficient use of public resources. So now moving on to the third tide is the watchful eye, and this focuses on transparency and fairness. So the philosophy overall really promotes open government and public trust, and ensures that hiring and management decisions are transparent and fair. So within HR, this means that public job postings, that job postings are public, and that in the hiring processes, there's equal opportunity, and then there's also protections for whistleblowers. So this supports fairness in how employees are treated overall. And an example is the California's Fair Political Practices Commission, or FPPC. I put their logo up as a visual, and they enforce transparency in government employment within our state. And they also put in place those ethic rules for public servants in general. Moving on, we have our final reform philosophy, and that's liberation management. And this is all about empowering employees and boosting overall performance. And within this tide, there's a lot of value put into innovation, customer service, and flexibility. And in general, it just seeks to empower employees to step away from rigid bureaucracy. So within HR, this looks like team-based projects, customer-focused services, and decentralized decision-making. And it really just trusts employees to think critically and solve problems rather than just following standard procedures that are put in place. An example of this is something that I actually saw through our workforce division. They put out a series on skills-based hiring. So instead of following, the rigid structures that they have in place currently with our hiring, where they look at your merits and what degrees you have rather than the experience that you hold. Skills-based hiring looks at that. So they take into account your years of experience, so that even though you may be in a job for 10 years and you have all this leadership knowledge, but you don't have the degree for it, you are still eligible for the next position up. So that's a real-world example of liberation management that hopefully can be more applied within at least our department. And with that concludes my presentation. So thank you so much for listening. And here you'll see my contact information. If you have any questions or would like to connect, there's my work and school email. Thank you.